Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, March 19th, and we have a lot for the show today. We're going to be starting with the news in the NFL of Justin Fields being traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We will dive into all of that, what this means for the Steelers, as well as in the second segment, talk about the vacancy that is there in the quarterback position in Chicago and touch on Robert Griffin III's comments that the Bears should look to, or that Caleb Williams should look to demand that the Bears do not take him. So we're going to be getting into those comments, and I happen to disagree with that. So we will be looking at the situations that number one draft picks have been drafted into in the past. Then in the third segment, we are going to be outlining the remainder of the available free agents before finishing off the show by talking about all NBA teams with just over a month left in the season before the playoffs start, getting into the race that is at hand there, because that of course has financial implications for a lot of these players. But before we get into the show, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us, and for any of our live viewers to use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, that is gsmcpodcast.net. If you would like to tip or donate, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, getting into our first segment of the day, which is Justin Fields being traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Really interesting how this all played out, because the Steelers were a team that Justin Fields was linked to at the beginning of the offseason, but there were many reports that came out about how the Steelers weren't looking for any veteran guys. They weren't necessarily interested in Justin Fields. And here they are with a totally new quarterback room in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. So this trade took place on Saturday, did come right off of the heels of them trading their starter from last season, Kenny Pickett, to the Eagles, which took place late on Friday. Pickett reportedly did not handle the Russell Wilson signing well and was sent packing from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. The Steelers acquired a fourth-round pick for Kenny Pickett and then moved a conditional sixth-rounder for Justin Fields. It could pan out to be a fourth-round pick, depending on how much playing time Justin Fields gets in Pittsburgh, but very interesting to see how that all played out. But on the note of playing time, that is the big debate that is going on in Pittsburgh now with these two quarterbacks in the room. Again, neither of them were in Pittsburgh last year too, so it's not like there's any sort of a real established dynamic ahead of time. Now, it has been reported that Russell Wilson will be the week one starter. Supposedly, Justin Fields was told immediately that he was going to be the Steelers' backup for the upcoming season. Now, we will see how long that lasts. It's interesting because Russell Wilson, who the Steelers signed to just a $1.2 million deals a couple weeks ago, it's not like they are wrapped up financially in him, so it could be very easy for them to move on from him if they wanted to go with Fields. But it's also interesting to see how they play this season, because of the fact that you look at the Steelers organization and you have to sort of wonder what their number one priority it is. I would say it is trying to win games, win playoff games, which some of you may be like, no duh, but there is something to when you bring in a young quarterback for the first time. It's about developing him. For the Panthers this year, their priority is not to necessarily win games. It's making sure that they didn't make a mistake in taking Bryce Young and trying to set him up for the future. The Steelers here have been in the realm of, I wouldn't say contention necessarily, but they've been, it's almost more like mediocrity, where, of course, Mike Tomlin's streak as the head coach of the Steelers of never having a losing season continued on this past year. We're now looking at 2 decades of this, and yet, even with the non-losing records the past handful of years, they still haven't won a playoff game since 2016. And since then, again, it's been some fine football, but overall it's been very mediocre, where they've had winning seasons in the past 3 years with 2 playoff appearances, and yet they've had a negative point differential on the season in all 3 of those years. They were 0-2 in the playoffs during that stretch, and Tomlin has helped this Steelers team overachieve because he's a good coach, but they've been missing the elite quarterback play. Of course, Ben Roethlisberger was getting older. He ends up retiring in 2021, I believe it was, but even by the end of that run for Roethlisberger, it was pretty hard to watch. A legend of the game, of course, but his best years were very clearly behind him, and he was really a shell of himself at that time. They've ranked 23rd or lower in offensive yards each of the past 5 seasons, 21st or lower in points scored in 4 of the past 5, and because of this, they felt the need to shake things up headed into next season. And now both of these options in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields can be solid, but they do come with some concerns, which is why, of course, they were both available. I do think that it's sort of being generalized that they were both available, which means they were both not good enough in their previous destinations. Now, while to some degree that's true, I also don't think that that's fully fair, because Justin Fields, I've never been a huge fan of. I think the inconsistencies in the passing game are a real concern. The fumbling has been a little ridiculous, especially some of the late game moments with him. But I thought that he showed some promise last year, to the point where if the Bears didn't have the number 1 overall pick, especially in a second straight year, they wouldn't be moving on from him, where there is still a level of unknown of whether or not Fields can be a true franchise quarterback. But Caleb Williams is coming into this draft, to some being named one of the best quarterback prospects we've seen entering the draft of all time. Now, that seems a little bit extreme, but at the same time, the Bears last year had the number 1 overall pick. They passed on using it to get another year. They acquired DJ Moore. It was a great deal for them. That also got them the number 1 overall pick this season. But you see, Bryce Young might not have had the best rookie season, but CJ Stroud really popped. Anthony Richardson dealt with injuries, but he seems like he could be a franchise quarterback as well. And for GM Ryan Poles, his job is really on the line with this decision. And specifically, if he were to not take a quarterback in this draft and Fields doesn't work out, his job is on the line, and he knows that. This helps him to sort of prolong his career as the Bears general manager, and there's a handful of moves that he's made that people have been a big fan of. I think that he's been very hit or miss at times, so I don't want to give him all the credit in the world, but he has helped to build up, at least we saw from the trade deadline on last year when they added Montez Sweat, they have been a team trending in the right direction. But again, that quarterback position is still a little bit of a question mark, and now they are moving on from Fields and ideally moving forward with Caleb Williams. At least that is what it seems like. Now, if you look at Russell Wilson and how he plays into all of this with the Steelers, there was a case where it was more so the Broncos just massively overpaying to bring him in a trade a couple years ago in terms of money and draft compensation. This is one where the Broncos are paying him $40 million to be somewhere else. So I don't think that those circumstances automatically make Justin Fields better, but I do think that there is a real discrepancy in between why Russell Wilson was available and why Justin Fields was available. Now, on that note, as much as I'm not really a believer in Russell Wilson, I've been pretty vocal about that on the show the past few weeks. I do understand why they would lean to him being the starting quarterback entering the season, where, of course, veteran quarterback, you're trying to win playoff games. There's not really, again, I don't think that their priority is going to be anywhere near making sure Justin Fields is in the best possible situation to succeed. I believe it's more about they know that they need to actually start winning some of these playoff games. Mike Tomlin is headed into the last season of his contract. They want to win some playoff games, and Russell Wilson, in theory, based off of the veteran guy, has been to multiple Super Bowls, can be the one to sort of take the Steelers over the hump. I still don't see Super Bowl contention necessarily with either of these guys, but there is a possibility that they could really level up from an offense that has been very stagnant over the past handful of years. And ideally for the Steelers, their day one starter is good enough to lead them to the place where they need to be. But also, I think when it comes to this veteran leadership and along those lines, it's probably easier for them to bench an older veteran quarterback for a younger guy. And if they, for any reason, had to make another switch, Wilson would probably be more prepared as opposed to Justin Fields. We just saw last year where Kenny Pickett got injured. It was Mason Rudolph coming in, and once the team started winning games, they stuck it out with him, and Pickett was really, I don't know, it's hard to say dramatic about the situation, but reports came out that he refused to be the emergency quarterback should they need him. There's just almost this psychological factor that comes in with the youth versus the experience. And even if Russell Wilson were to, and again, the Steelers aren't planning for this, but if Wilson were to get benched early in the year, he can still be a viable fallback option late in the year if Justin Fields either isn't playing well or gets injured. And again, not trying to make multiple changes in that quarterback position, but something worth noting in my opinion. I do think that essentially saying there's no competition entering week one all the way in March is a little bit interesting, where you could at least start to build up, obviously not quarterback controversy, but a competition, a healthy competition, I do think is beneficial to everyone involved in those instances. And that's essentially not the case now. They're saying it's going to be Wilson, and ultimately we won't really have answers as to who is the best option for them, who gives them the best chance to win until training camp comes around a few months in the future. Like I sort of alluded to, it is much easier for the Steelers to bench a Russell Wilson who is on a bargain of a deal, just $1.2 million, while they had to give up limited but draft capital for Justin Fields in a 6th rounder, could be a 4th rounder, and going forward are tied to him at least possibly a little bit longer. Now, they have until May to decide whether or not they're going to pick up the 5th year option on Justin Fields. That would jump to just over $25 million in salary cap hit for the 2025 season. Seems sort of unlikely that the Steelers would pick that up, I think, at this moment, where they probably could have gotten more, the Bears, that is, and the Steelers would have had to give up more if it sounded like that was going to be the plan. Maybe it was just a negotiation tactic between the Steelers and the Bears, but we will see. I am definitely looking forward to seeing what the locker room dynamic between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields is going to look like, where it's two players in very different points of their career. Wilson, the veteran, trying to hang on. Justin Fields still just in his fourth season looking to prove himself. But that is the thing. They're both still trying to show that they are worthy of being a starting quarterback in the NFL. And I can't imagine there's going to be too much. I mean, I'm sure it won't be a bad relationship necessarily, but it isn't going to be this veteran younger guy mentorship. I can't imagine. And because Russell Wilson, he has to worry about himself before taking on any sort of an advisor role to a younger guy. He still believes that he's capable of being a starting quarterback. Curious what it looks like for Wilson going forward if this doesn't pan out in Pittsburgh this season, if he would be willing to hang around in the NFL as a backup, or if he calls it quits, which is probably what I would believe he more so leans towards. But again, we'll have to see how this season goes for him in terms of being the starting quarterback, at least headed into the season. It's also interesting if you look at sort of the reputations that both of these players have had in their respective locker rooms over the past few seasons, where Cole Kmet, the tight end for the Bears, young player, developed a strong connection with Justin Fields through their time. He went on the CHGO Bears podcast yesterday, made some comments about how much he's going to miss Fields, that it's upsetting. It's going to take a little bit to get over it, but eventually they'll have to get there. On the other end, Russell Wilson didn't really seem to have a good reputation with his teammates in Denver, and there was the whole story about him having his own office and the disconnect that was there between Wilson and the rest of the group. So again, just other interesting subplots, I feel like, that come with this. And we saw last year, again, a little bit of that, how the player connects with the rest of the locker room. It sounds like the guys in Pittsburgh sided more so with Mason Rudolph than with Kenny Pickett, which was part of the divide that led to the departure of Kenny Pickett in the trade on Friday. So again, a lot of things to monitor here. Should be a lot of fun. Again, the entire reshuffling of the quarterback room was a little bit of a surprise, but for content-wise, definitely not a bad thing. And I feel like Steelers fans have to acknowledge that the way that things were going last year in Pittsburgh, a new scene probably was the best option for them. I wouldn't say a Kenny Pickett apologist. I think that he has gotten, for as much apologizing as we do about Justin Fields' situation in Chicago, I feel like none of that same energy remains with how Pickett played out in Pittsburgh. And we're going to get more so into the situations that surround the quarterback position in our next subject, where we had former NFL quarterback Robert Griffin III go on social media and talk about how Caleb Williams should demand that the Bears do not select him. So we are going to dive into all of that. Stick with us and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some moosey shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about initial thoughts from the Justin Fields to the Pittsburgh Steelers deal, which of course leaves a vacancy at the quarterback position for the Chicago Bears and makes it official that they are going to be selecting a quarterback in the upcoming draft. And we are going to be diving into what it looks like for whoever that may be, whether it's Caleb Williams or someone else. But this resonated with me because yesterday, Robert Griffin III, former Washington quarterback, posted on social media a clip of him talking about how Caleb Williams should, quote, pull an Eli Manning and demand that the Chicago Bears do not draft him. He referenced that Caleb Williams should look at the way that things just played out with Justin Fields, the fact that Fields just went for a 6th round pick, and reflect on himself that the Bears may not be able to put him in position to succeed. And I disagreed with this firmly in terms of, you look at the situations that Justin Fields walked into when he joined the Bears in 2021 versus where the Bears are at now and the level of talent that is across the roster. Also keeping in mind that Justin Fields was the 4th quarterback selected in his class, and this is Caleb Williams, who should be the consensus number 1 overall pick in this draft. I do think that, Fields has been, and again, I think that Fields still has potential. He had his best season of his career in my eyes last season. I know that the rushing numbers for himself were down, but I thought that in terms of being an actual passer, we saw the best from Fields up to this point. That being said, though, I've never been entirely sold on him as a pro-level quarterback, and he does deserve some of the blame in this scenario. First couple years weren't great in terms of what the Bears were able to put around him, but they were trying to make improvements to the roster. Now, I think coming into this upcoming year, no rookie quarterback should be upset with the infrastructure that they have on the offensive side of the ball going into next year, where they just went out and signed running back DeAndre Swift. DJ Moore is still there coming off of a really explosive season, and they get Keenan Allen in a trade for almost nothing, a 4th round pick. Allen having one of the best years of his career with Cole Kmet as well, who's a great red zone threat as well. It's not the best offensive line in the league there in Chicago, but definitely improved from recent years, and as long as they're healthy, they should be middle of the pack. So I don't really see any holes on this offense necessarily outside of the quarterback position. And I wanted to look back a little bit with the past decade or so and look at the other situations that former number 1 overall quarterbacks were drafted into to see how they compare to what the Bears should be rolling out in 2024. Since 2010, there have been 10 quarterbacks being drafted number 1 overall, and I do think that where the Bears are at now clear some of the roster talent that was in place for some of these former guys. So I'm not even mentioning the dreadful situations. I went through and listed out some of the offenses that could be at least comparable to the Bears in this sense. In 2019, the Cardinals drafted Kyler Murray with the first overall pick. They had some name recognition for sure in Larry Fitzgerald, David Johnson, and Christian Kirk, but Larry Fitzgerald was 36 at this point and retired a season later after 2020. David Johnson was 3 seasons removed from his All-Pro selection. He totaled just 345 yards on the ground across 13 games. Kenyon Drake was actually the leading rusher for that team. Christian Kirk was an emerging young player, was a legitimate second option, had over 700 yards, but no other player outside of Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald had over 400 receiving yards. The team was 5-10-1, and ultimately we still are yet to see Kyler Murray really be able to have a ton of a supporting cast around him. It's been a lot of moving parts over the past handful of seasons, and he's already on his second head coach. In 2015, the Buccaneers drafted Jameis Winston. Now, they did have all-pro running back Doug Martin at the time, who was in the peak of his career. Mike Evans was in his second season, caught over 1,200 receiving yards. An older but solid Vincent Jackson. But outside of that, there really was not much in Tampa Bay that year. They did have a Pro Bowl guard, at least in Logan Mankins, but were starting a couple young players as well on the offensive line beside him. So not a great situation there in Tampa. 2012, the Colts took Andrew Luck, number 1 overall. This was the final great year of Hall of Fame receiver Reggie Wayne's career, over 1,300 yards. The last time he was selected to a Pro Bowl. So he was, of course, on his last legs there. They did have a rookie, T.Y. Hilton, who was also drafted in that same class of Andrew Luck. He had 861 yards, 7 touchdowns. He became a perennial Pro Bowler a couple seasons later, so that was a big benefit for Andrew Luck. Another rookie running back starting here, Vic Ballard. He was out of the league by 2014. Really, his rookie season in 2012 was his only productive year of his career. And obviously, when you talk about the situation that Andrew Luck came into when he was emerging in the league, the talent was clearly there, but he had to retire early because the offensive line was a mess there. He was dealing with serious injuries, and he ended up retiring in 2019, right before the season. So you definitely cannot say the Colts did right by him then. 2011, you had the Panthers drafting Cam Newton. Now, I think this is the top rival in terms of supporting cast for a number 1 overall quarterback. You had Steve Smith Jr. in the last Pro Bowl season of his career, but he was incredible for them that year. Brandon LaFell was a pretty decent second option at that time as well. You had a young Greg Olsen, a really nice run game between D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, a Pro Bowl center in Ryan Khalil. And again, I think that this is probably where your biggest competition in terms of a supporting cast for a number 1 overall pick in the last decade or so comes from. But also important noting when you look at these scenarios where outside of Ron Rivera with the Panthers, the head coaches for these other teams were all gone within 5 seasons or less. So Cam Newton was the only one who got real stability at the head coach. Now, Matt Eberflus for the Chicago Bears is still a little bit of a question mark. The Bears are just 10-24 in their 2 seasons with him as the head coach. But I did think that the team was rounding a corner during the year. We saw when Justin Fields went down with an injury, Bagent was able to step in and actually help them still win a game or two, which as much as the story of Bagent was a lot of fun, I thought it was more so about the defense that was really elevated over the second half of the season. Like we mentioned in the first segment, they traded for Montez Sweat, who was massive for their edge rush during the latter half of the season. They allowed 20 points or less in the last 6 games of the year. The team went 4-2 in that stretch. Keep in mind, his history as a coach in the NFL is on the defensive side of the ball, but I do think that there could potentially be something there with Eberflus. We'll obviously have to see, but really outside of maybe some question marks at head coach, maybe you don't believe in Ryan Poles, the general manager, but I think it's the logo with the Bears that can be a little bit scary, because they are, in fact, the one franchise in the NFL that is yet to have a 4,000-yard passer in their history. And keep in mind, the Bears have been in the NFL as long as anybody, and this is the reality of the situation for them. They have used first-round picks on 4 quarterbacks since 1999, so the past 25 years. Cade McNown, Rex Grossman, Mitchell Trubisky, and Justin Fields. The jury is obviously still out on Justin Fields, but outside of that, the other 3 were big-time busts, and based on the history of the franchise, I can't say I have the utmost confidence in the Bears being able to develop a quarterback, but they have all the tools they could possibly need for whoever steps in at quarterback for them next season, where you have 2 really good receivers. Again, Keenan Allen, yes, he's now in his 30s, and you wouldn't expect his prime to be upon him, but he had debatably the best season of his career. That's what he single-handedly called it in his press conference the other day after being traded to the Bears, where he was able to actually play in the majority of games. Still 13, which isn't, tremendous, but someone who's dealt with injuries a lot through his career, plays 13 games, set a franchise record with the Chargers for receptions in a single season with 108, 1,243 yards, 7 touchdowns, and now you're pairing that along with a DJ Moore, who we saw some of the individual games with him were just ridiculous, where he made things so much easier for Fields, which is the whole idea of going out to get weapons for your young quarterback, where the decisions are that much easier for you. Just get them the ball and they will fly. Moore had the most yards he's ever had in a single season, where he had 1,364, 8 touchdowns as well. And I just think that this is a good scenario. Now, I'm not the biggest DeAndre Swift fan in the world, but a very viable option in the backfield as well. Off the top of my head, I don't remember whether or not they still have the likes of a Khalil Herbert, who I am a fan of in the run game as well. So I'm going to do a quick double check on that. But again, Swift should be a fine option. They do have Khalil Herbert still. They also still have Roschon Johnson, who also flashed at times for them. So to RG3's point about Caleb Williams should demand he goes somewhere else, I just feel like you look at the other teams that are in need of a rookie quarterback, and where are you really trying to go outside of if he ended up in Minnesota? I could understand that. You get paired with Justin Jefferson. That would be amazing to watch, but the top 3 picks are all going to be quarterbacks. The Bears are definitely taking one. The Commanders are definitely taking one. I think that they've made some steps in the right direction in terms of adding a little bit of extra help on the offensive line. Austin Eckler, his best years are behind him, but maybe he can be a decent addition alongside Brian Robinson Jr. in terms of running backs that can be effective in the pass game as well. And the Patriots, who have tons of holes at offensive line and in the receiving game. So I think the Bears blow these other top 3 teams out of the water in that type of a position. And again, it's the Bears, and they're in a tough position in terms of they haven't had elite quarterback success throughout their entire history. You do have to hold that against them, but I don't think that it's a new regime here in Chicago, and I'm not saying I'm all in on them necessarily. I still really like the Lions. I still really like the Packers. So it's not like their division is wide open either, but I feel like there is definitely room for success there in Chicago, and I don't think that comparing what just happened to Justin Fields to the reality of where they're at today is necessarily fair. Again, Justin Fields, I think he gets a ton of slack. He doesn't get the blame necessarily that he maybe deserves through his career. Now, again, the Bears definitely didn't do him tons of favors when he was in town for them, but at the same time, he wasn't the level of prospect that Caleb Williams is, and there's way more talent on that roster now than there was when Justin Fields first came in, and I do think that this Chicago team could potentially be, in the area. Also, you keep in mind, too, with the NFC right now, as much as I just said, I like the Lions, I like the Packers, you look at all the consensus best quarterbacks in the league are all in the AFC. Caleb Williams has a chance to play for a historic franchise and become the best quarterback in the NFC. I'm just saying it's a possibility. I'm sort of 50-50 on Caleb Williams as a prospect myself, but guess what? I'm not a professional NFL scout. I watch the games, I study all of it, but ultimately my opinion on what a guy means is sort of irrelevant. I'm just looking at the situation as a whole that Caleb Williams could be walking into, and I think that this could be, again, at least in my lifetime, an all-time opportunity for him to walk into the NFL with an actual good structure around him. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the top remaining free agents that are out there in the NFL. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking the Justin Fields trade, the aftermath of the Bears situation, and how they look as a team for a future quarterback moving forward. Now we are going to be touching back on free agency, which we are now just over a week into. The legal tampering period opened last Monday. So we're a week past there, and there are still a handful of big names that are available on the open market. So we're just going to sort of rattle through some names here, some potential landing spots, as well as some analysis on how they still can hold up moving forward and impact a team in the coming season. I do want to start out by addressing that we did, just before the show started, had some news in terms of one of these top remaining guys, where offensive tackle Trent Brown was signed to a one-year deal from the Cincinnati Bengals. He was thought of for a lot of people as one of the top offensive linemen remaining in the free agent class. Now, there's a chance I'm a little biased in this, but I don't see it with Trent Brown. I am a Patriots fan. I've seen it. His attitude, and granted, Patriots situation, I cannot imagine would have been fun to be a part of this season, but his attitude was terrible. Physically, he had his really great year a handful of years ago before he got signed to the Las Vegas Raiders at the time. They might have still been Oakland at the time. I believe they were, but he was good with the Patriots in 2018, was a Pro Bowler with the Raiders in 2019, and really fell off from there. Health hasn't been there with him necessarily since then. Now, I'm not saying it's a terrible signing here. They are hoping that they can make up a little bit as well, because it was just last offseason where they went out and paid Orlando Brown Jr., who was fine, but definitely was not the Pro Bowl level player that he was in the past with the Chiefs and the Ravens. So it was a little bit disappointing there for them last season. They're hoping that they can sort of revamp this, and they need the protection for Joe Burrow, who there is this emerging storyline that he is injury prone. I don't know if that's totally fair, but it's also a little bit hard to gauge as he has missed tons of time in the NFL with injuries. So we'll see how that works out for Cincinnati. Some other linemen still available, as we're touching on it, are Connor Williams, the former Dolphins center, and Mekhi Becton, the former tackle for the New York Jets. Williams tore his ACL in December, so timeline-wise, he might not be 100% by the start of the season, but he could definitely be a nice addition for a team. Mekhi Becton has been disappointing since being drafted 11th overall by the Jets in 2020. Injuries have played a large role in that. He hasn't necessarily reportedly had the, top tier buy-in in terms of he was moved to the right tackle position. He actually blamed being on that opposite side as to why he got hurt in the 2022 season. Who knows, maybe that does have some validity to it, but he was able to play 16 games for the Jets last season. Hasn't lived up to expectations, though, from when he was drafted. It hurts that Tristan Wirfs was taken just a couple of draft picks later in 2020, who has been to 3 straight Pro Bowls and has been selected to 2 different All-Pro teams during his young career. But that's enough on offensive linemen, because unless you're a real football sicko like me, you probably don't care as much about the offensive lineman news. But in terms of namesake, I think that Mike Williams being on the market is one of the most intriguing players that remains unsigned. He was released by the Chargers last week due to his lucrative contract and the Chargers salary cap situation. They had to move on from him to clear $20 million that they needed to get under the salary cap number for next season. It makes sense why they made this move, but it does also hurt. This is a loss of a talented wide receiver. They have Justin Herbert, who they're hoping to continue to put him in position to succeed, which has been a big subject of the day, really. But the talent is definitely there with Mike Williams, where he was drafted 7th overall in 2017. He's had multiple 1,000-yard seasons. He's caught 10 touchdowns in a year, 9 touchdowns in a year, but injuries have unfortunately played a very large role in his career. He has played just 1 full season in his NFL career. There have been some concerning back injuries over the course of it. And then last season, after 3 games, he tore his ACL, which was a brutal blow. He's going to be entering his age 30 season next year. And while he's never reached that full potential when he was coming into the NFL, he is still one of the best contested catch receivers on the outside in the NFL. And he could be a nice veteran addition to a team that needs some help on the perimeter. NBC Sports yesterday reported that he will meet with the New York Jets, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Carolina Panthers this week. I can't imagine the Panthers would be their first choice necessarily, but I would not mind seeing him in Carolina. I feel like that could be a really nice addition in terms of helping out Bryce Young, where, again, I can't say that this would be his number one idea. He'd probably want to pair himself up with an Aaron Rodgers if he could, but I don't think he's going to get a long-term deal, really, based off of how this has all played out the past couple of years. Now, we'll still see how this works. We'll see how the meetings go here. But for the development of Bryce Young, I would be really curious to see him with a guy like Mike Williams on the outside, where you can almost afford a little bit more to make the risky throws because he is so good in those one-on-one situations, where helping him to develop his throwing outside, but throwing some anticipation routes, those types of things could be a lot of fun to see him work with in the next season. But I feel like if I had to bet right now, I guess I would go with the Jets. I think the Steelers could also be interesting as well. Of course, they're trying to revamp parts of their offense. They bring in their two new quarterbacks. They trade wide receiver Deontay Johnson. So there is a bit of a gap there that Mike Williams could potentially fill, but we will see. Some other wide receivers that are still on the market as well: Odell Beckham Jr., Tyler Boyd, Michael Gallup, Michael Thomas, Hunter Renfrow, DJ Chark. Out of the group, I don't think that there's any real game-changing players. Mike Williams has the highest ceiling out of all of these players, but there are a couple interesting names here. Michael Thomas, I'm going to keep it brief with him because the unfortunate situation is it just doesn't seem like the room is still there for him to be a top-tier weapon on the outside. He's been plagued with injuries since he broke the record for receptions in a season in 2019. Since then, he has played in just 20 out of the 67 games possible. Since then, last season was his healthiest year since then, played in 10, but still not an ideal situation there. Michael Gallup was actually healthier last year. He's been a little bit on and off the field as well, but he more so just fell down the depth chart in Dallas as they had other guys emerging for them. He hasn't ever been able to recapture that 1,100-yard season that he had in 14 games in 2019, but he's still not old. He's still entering his age 28 season, so there is maybe a way that he could bounce back, but it does seem like his best days have passed him by. Tyler Boyd is another one that's interesting just because he is also someone that has been buried a little bit on the depth chart in Cincinnati with how good that receiver room has been, but he is a very solid option to have around the edges as well. I would be very happy if the Patriots went out and signed him just as a fan perspective there, but that's mostly it for receivers. There are a handful of other options in the secondary for teams that need help on the back end of their defenses. You have a couple good safeties in Justin Simmons and Julian Blackmon, where Simmons missed a handful of games over the past couple seasons. He's entering his age 31 season, but he's been all-pro second team in 4 of the past 5 years. Led the league in interceptions in 2022. I definitely feel like he can be an upgrade for a handful of teams out there. You also have a list of cornerbacks that have some big names as well. Former Defensive Player of the Year Stephon Gilmore, Xavier Howard, Steven Nelson, Adoree Jackson, Tre'Davious White are all still available. Out of this group, I think Xavier Howard is the one that can definitely still be the highest of ceilings, where he was more so just not brought back in Miami due to the fact that they are very plagued with salary cap issues as well. He still provides a lot, although he did have one of his worst seasons of his career in 2023, but this is someone who has been a Pro Bowler a handful of years. He's been on all-pro teams throughout his career, and he's going to be entering his age 31 season, so maybe he can recapture some of that in a good system. Tre'Davious White is a player that probably not going to get the dollar value that he would have imagined he would coming into this situation, but is a player that if you are a team that needs help on the back end, I'm specifically looking at the Detroit Lions in this situation. Again, for the right price, I would definitely be curious in them going after White, where it's been a handful of really injury-plagued years for him, which is disheartening because he was looked to be at least a perennial all-pro guy early in his career, but just has not been the same since 2020, and could just serve to be a nice talent still as long as he stays on the field. Is he going to be an all-pro? No, but can definitely be an upgrade from some of what Detroit was running last season. There are also a couple players on the front line, such as Jadeveon Clowney. Last year, he tied his career high in sacks with 9.5. He has been really bouncing around the past handful of years because since being the number one overall pick, just has never really fully lived up to the expectations that were put on him early in his career. He was an all-pro in 2016, but now has been bouncing around year to year. He is on Baltimore. This past year was his fifth team in 6 seasons. Last year he took a pay cut to go to the Ravens, so I don't know if he's going to be willing to come back for that same discounted price again. I was thinking that maybe the way that he was able to be as effective as he was in last year, that he would maybe be willing to roll the dice on another year there, but he's also now in his 30s. The amount of big time paydays are going to be more limited, so curious whether or not he will be okay with taking a lesser valued contract. You also have the likes of Calais Campbell, who at this point, he's really up there in age. He's going to be 38 next season. Spent the past 2 seasons, I believe, with Atlanta. Someone that could be a good locker room guy, could also definitely see retiring. Mike Dana is another one as well, was with the Chiefs last season. Seems like he's going to get more money elsewhere than the Chiefs itself. But that is all we really have for today on that update. We're going to be taking our final break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into the NBA and the potential All-NBA selections as we are winding down to the final days of the 2023-24 regular season. So stick with us, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are headed into the final segment of the day, which will be deciding all NBA teams with 1 month remaining until the playoffs. The playoffs will be kicking off April 20th, so we are just outside 1 month until then, and we're going to be selecting the all NBA teams 1, 2, and 3 in the segment. Now, keep in mind, there is still a few weeks left in this, and especially for some of those third team selections, I think there's a lot of players that could potentially get hot and find their way into that category. But we're going to maybe be doing a little bit of projecting, but ultimately deciding on the players as things stand today. A couple things to keep in mind is we have some new rules with the All-NBA teams where it is not position based. You can pick any 5 players for the first team, and additionally, this is the first season with the 65 game minimum in terms of games played to be eligible. So that obviously means no Joel Embiid. That means no Tyrese Halliburton, no Jimmy Butler, and no Donovan Mitchell are sort of the big names that are not going to be making this list because of injuries, unfortunately. I still haven't made my final decision, I feel like, in terms of whether or not the 65 game rule should be allowed. I think the idea of it makes a lot of sense because the NBA that has struggled so much with load management the past handful of seasons, they need to be able to sell themselves to networks that their product is worth investing into. So that part adds up to me, but I definitely think things can be tweaked. You have to play at least 20 minutes for the game to actually count, which is maybe a little bit ridiculous in my eyes. Again, we're not going to do this whole debate right now, though. But getting into the first team, I think that there are 4 locks for this. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic. SGA, Giannis, and Jokic are all having tremendous individual statistical seasons, putting up great stats, and their teams are top 2 in their respective conferences. I do think that this is no-brainer. Jokic seems like he's running away with the MVP award, but if you were to take him out of it, Giannis, SGA would also be right in the mix as well. I don't really have much hesitation at all in terms of them making it. Luka, I think, is a lock as well. The Mavs aren't having the same level of team success. They're hovering around the play-in tournament. They are currently 7th in the Western Conference at the time of recording this, but he has crazier individual stats than anybody else in the NBA, leading the league in scoring at 34.4 points per game. That is the highest in any given season since James Harden in 2019-20. And I went back to sort of look at that season as well for Harden. Luka is shooting with better efficiency on an increased volume as well from Harden, where he is this year shooting on 49-38 shooting splits, 23.7, which is ridiculous in its own. 23.7 attempts from the field, 10.4 attempts from 3. Harden, 44-36 splits in 19-20 on 22.3 and then 12.4 attempts per game from 3. So did shoot more 3s, but the shots overall go to Luka in this scenario. Luka, just as a note, also increased his 3-point attempts by over 2 per game and has still raised his percentage by a few points to be at a career high 38, which is pretty crazy. He's also averaging a career high in assists at 9.7, which is 3rd in the league, grabbing 9 rebounds per game as well. I do just want to say, I have made this argument on the show before, where as great as Luka's individual season is, I just don't think that he has a case for MVP. People look at these stats and say, well, what else can he do to win the MVP award? Not that it's all on him, but he can be on a team that wins more games. I think that especially now that we have this threshold of the play-in tournament, it is really hard for me to justify that a player who could technically not even make the playoffs, I do expect them to continue to win games. I've been on the record as well saying I really enjoy watching this Mavericks team, but first team All-NBA is a no-brainer to me as long as things don't go terribly wrong with the Mavericks, and I think it's very well deserved. I believe he was first team last year as well, and that was with the Mavericks missing the playoffs, so even that probably would not be able to derail him from making first team All-NBA, as I am running a quick check, and yes, he was All-NBA first team last year with the Mavs' bad season. So, a lock, as I was saying. Now, there are a few options left for that final first team spot between Jason Tatum, Kevin Durant, and Kawhi Leonard. Now, if you look at the three of these players, obviously three of the top forwards in the NBA, the Suns have been staggering, which hurts Kevin Durant because he has some of the best statistics out of this group. They are currently the 8th seed in the Western Conference. Durant himself has had a pretty rough week where he scored 20 or less points in the past 3 games. They got dismantled by the Celtics on primetime. They got dismantled by the Bucks, which was maybe an even worse loss, even though their offense actually showed up to that one. But Durant was not very good scoring-wise in that game either. His numbers as a whole, though, on the season obviously gets a little bit of extra attention as we come down the stretch of the regular season. But KD still has great numbers as a whole, just under 28 points per game, leads all three of these players in scoring. Kawhi has actually been better in terms of efficiency, just slightly, but he's having one of his best, if not the best, offensive seasons of his career. That has been a pleasure to watch. We're actually seeing him play games, and he's doing so in a really fun and great way. He is behind the other two, though, in terms of rebounds per game and assists per game. All three of these players, I think, don't get enough credit. Kawhi I wouldn't say he doesn't get enough credit for his defense. Kevin Durant and Jason Tatum, I both think, don't get enough credit for their defense. Kawhi is still a good defender, but he also has a little bit, if you haven't been fully in tuned to the Clippers, you might feel like he should be better because of his former Defensive Player of the Year awards, but he's still fine on the defensive end, and I don't want to take away from him for that. But my pick as of today would be Jason Tatum. He is the best player on significantly, at least regular season, the best team. They are on pace, the Celtics are, to win 65 games. He's averaging 27 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. What could hurt Tatum in this conversation, though, is the fact that the Celtics are 10 games ahead of the 2-seeded Bucks. They're basically locked into the 1 seed, and there won't be a real need for their stars to play down the stretch of the season. There are maybe 4 or 5 games that I personally really want to see from a competition standpoint, see the Celtics play in. They play the Bucks on Wednesday night. That they should all be present for, in my opinion. Maybe the Pelicans game at the end of the month, because the Pelicans are sort of a different team. They're very physical, and they're really coming along as of late. Definitely versus the Thunder on April 3rd, and at least one of the Bucks or Knicks games in the final week of the regular season. Probably more so the Bucks, but again, it's not the end of the world either, because they don't need any of these regular season games, and Tatum is just short already as it stands of being the 65 game eligible, where I also don't think that's going to be a problem for him whatsoever. He's played 64 games already. This is someone who has always sort of argued with the front office a little bit in terms of making sure that he does take rest when they need to. Again, I think if we're picking now, it's Tatum, but that is something I'm looking for in terms of this debate moving forward. So that's Shea, Luka, Tatum, Giannis, and Jokic on the first team. That leaves Durant and Kawhi on the second team. Who joins them? I think that Jalen Brunson has to be on it. Averaging 27 and 6, has carried a huge load offensively, especially in crunch time situations. The Knicks have been dealing with injuries and roster changes through the season. It was Randall going down first. He's going to miss just about half the season as a whole now. They trade for OG Anunoby, who goes down almost immediately. Came back briefly and is now hurt again. Missed the game last night. So for Brunson, no question to me, should be on one of these teams. I would argue that he should be second. Other candidates here, as we now have 2 spots left alongside Durant, Kawhi, and Brunson. Anthony Edwards, Anthony Davis, Devin Booker, and LeBron all sort of possibly can work their way into this spot. I would vote for Anthony Edwards in this situation, where he's had an incredible season, and he's only stepped it up since Karl Anthony Towns went down with the meniscus injury. He's played 6 games without Towns since then. He's averaging 31 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists in those games. They're 4-2, including scoring 37 points in a 20-point comeback against the Clippers. Now, Kawhi left after the first quarter in that game, so do with that what you will, but still an incredibly impressive performance in my eyes on prime time as well there. They are currently a 47-win team, are half a game back from the Thunder, who are the 1 seed. So with the team success, with how well he's been able to play on the season as a whole, and especially take his game to the next level without the presence of the other all-star on the team, I give the nod to Anthony Edwards. And then for the final spot, I lean one of the 2 Lakers, and it's tough here. I would probably, to give myself almost a little bit of a cop-out, I know that the positionless ballots here are a new thing this year, but just for the sake of giving myself almost a little bit of an out, I'm sorry. I'm doing it because it's a really hard pick between Anthony Davis and LeBron here. I would go with AD. I think that LeBron probably has to be on one of these teams as a whole. Now, the only knock, really, I feel like, in terms of having both of these players is the team success, which, to be fair, is a pretty valid argument. But I just think that with the other competitors really for this, I have a really hard time knocking both of them out. The Lakers are 37-32, which is the 9 seed in the Western Conference. Seems like they're probably going to be stuck in that position, 2.5 games back of the Phoenix Suns. So I don't know, maybe there's a chance that Devin Booker could be on this second team as well, but he's missed a handful of games. I think it should be fine for him in terms of being able to make the 65 game threshold. He's currently at 54, which means that he's going to have to play out the rest of the year for the most part. Also, just because of All-NBA aside, the Suns are going to need it with the way that the season currently is, where they're at the 8th seed, but there are 14 games left for the Suns this season. He needs to play in 11 more to make it, so that is going to be a little bit of a down the stretch situation there. We'll see how that works, but assuming he does reach that, I would have Devin Booker and LeBron James both on the 3rd team. From there, I think it is pretty difficult because you have a lot of people that are sort of in the same realm. A name that I really think is coming along as of late is Zion, where we've seen these point Zion minutes and we've seen the way that he's been looking to dominate a lot more down the stretch. Now, statistically, I don't know if it's going to reach the heights it needs to, but if you look at his play of late and the way that the Pelicans as a whole are really shaping into a potentially more dangerous playoff team, currently sit at the 5 seed. I know that the Clippers don't want to play them in that 4-5 matchup. The physicality that the Pelicans have would be pretty scary there. I do think I'm going to have to snub Zion on this one, but he was in the realm of consideration for me. I think from here, we have 3 spots left available next to Booker and LeBron. I'm going to go with Bam Adebayo, and I know that some of his statistical arguments aren't really necessarily there, but I do think that he is just so huge for them. I know it can be a little bit overstated at times, but the playing 1 through 5 on defense, I just think he's so valuable on the defensive side of the ball. Plus, we're seeing him play a good brand of offense as well. I also think I'm going to double down on the bigs with Domantas Sabonis. Again, these third-team selections, it's really tough with the number of guys that are in this realm. But Sabonis, I mean, his statistical season is actually just stupid, leading the league in rebounds per game. He is scoring just under 20 at... it is now officially 20 points per game, 13.7 rebounds per game, and 8.3 assists. So I'm going to add him to the team as well. And then finally, I think I'm going to have to go with Jaylen Brown in this one. And again, keep in mind there is time for some of these to change as we enter the final stretch of the regular season. But Jaylen Brown, it's not that the advanced statistics are probably going to argue very highly for it, but he's been playing like the best Celtic for the past handful of weeks. Again, 65 win pace. I'm going with my gut here, and I'm going with Jaylen Brown here. I promise you it's not a biased thing. It is more so about the team's success and how good he's been playing as of late. He looks like he could really be on one for when the playoffs come around in a month. But that is all we have time for today. I guess before we go, just a quick recap here. It's Shea, Luka, Tatum, Giannis, and Jokic on the first team. Second team is Durant, Kawhi, Brunson, Anthony Davis, and the last one that we had, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost here for a second. And last one is Anthony Edwards. Third team, we have Booker, LeBron, Bam, Sabonis, and Jaylen Brown. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We will be back, as always, 2 o'clock tomorrow. So be sure to like, subscribe, and tune in with us tomorrow. We will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.